Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Hi, I'm Jen Shirkani, and welcome back to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. In the episode today, we're going to look at Trap 1, which is ignoring feedback you don't like. I also see it as maybe not getting feedback that you really need to hear. Now, let me just back up a little and explain EQ, or emotional intelligence, for a second, and the definition. So we're talking about three main pieces. First, your ability to recognize yourself. So knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, knowing what brings out the best in you, but also what brings out the worst in you. Ways to understand your emotions and your moods and how they might be affecting you. Secondly, it's reading others. So plugging into other people, watching them verbally and non-verbally, having social and situational awareness, so reading the room. And the last part is responding appropriately, choosing responses that are best based on that person you're with or the situation you're in, instead of having a reflexive response or an impulsive reaction. So I mentioned these ego traps, and again, it's more like the organization you work in starts to set people up to have these traps. I call them traps for a reason, right? Because it's the environment that can sometimes create situations that make it difficult for us to use our EQ in various scenarios. And this lack of feedback piece is the first one because it's so foundational to emotional intelligence. It's really hard for me to know how to respond to something if I'm not reading it right, if I don't get the feedback on what's going well and not going well. And it's a tale as old as the emperor not wearing any clothes, right? Nobody wants to give somebody bad news, especially if they seem very convinced of something in the other direction. And so much of self-awareness, though, is sort of the pathway to growth. So even when we start a coaching engagement, one of the first things we focus on is self-awareness. What does this person know about themselves? And what do they know about perception of others? So this is a great foundational skill to start with. If you want to work on your own emotional intelligence, start with self-awareness. Now, why people don't give feedback all the time. You could probably imagine why you might not give feedback to someone else. But I think the driving piece of this is fear. People are afraid to tell somebody something that they think might upset them. They sometimes worry about retaliation or maybe not being seen as a good employee, partner, teammate, husband, wife, child, etc. So fear plays a big role in this. And we have to respect the fact that when people do give us feedback, it's pretty special because they've overcome that fear that we all have. I think another part of this that I had not really realized until I really started looking at this was respect. Believe it or not, people don't always give feedback out of respect. You might be a very popular leader. You might be somebody that a lot of people like. And so they see a couple things and they think, well, 95% of you is great. I'm not going to ruffle feathers for a 5% piece of change. So I'll just say nothing and hope this problem goes away on its own, or I'll just overlook it. And of course, that can work for a while, but eventually if people aren't giving you feedback because they like you too much, or they are trying to protect you in some way and take care of issues so you don't have to worry about it, you're still being left in the dark a bit. So it's important to overcome even that one. Here's the third reason why people don't give feedback: because they don't deem it worthwhile. Meaning maybe you're somebody who gets really defensive And so it's just not worth it to go through the pain of telling you something and then having you fight back about it. Or I'll tell you an example that happened in our company life where we were asked to come in and work with a leader at an organization who had about 6 direct reports. And the team had been complaining about this leader for a while, had been pretty unhappy with her, and had called into the corporate office multiple times, basically saying, it's her or us. Like, we're at the point where something has to change. So they asked us to come in and meet with the team, see if we could get to the bottom of what was going on. And one of the things we did is an exercise where we gave everybody a list of 10 leadership traits. And we said, rank this leader on a scale of 1 to 10 on these 10. So 1 to 10, rank them for us on what this person's doing best and what this person is not doing so well. And we gave the same list to the leader. Well, when we looked at the lists from the team, in the very bottom, for most people, somewhere between 8 and 10, they had listed listening skills. But when we looked at the leader's self-assessment of the rank, listening skills was number 1. So we noticed, of course, an immediate gap there between her perception of things and their perception of things. So when we met with the team without her, we asked about this listening skills score and said, tell us why this is rated so low. And they said, well, every meeting we meet once a week, she will ask for feedback. And at the end of the meeting, she'll say, what can I do to get better? What can I do to help you? And of course, we were kind of surprised by that because we thought somebody with low listening skills wouldn't be asking for a lot of feedback. So we asked, what's the problem then if she's asking for the feedback? They said, we've given her several things and nothing ever changes. We've told her for months what needs to change, and she just says, thank you. Thank you so much for the feedback. I'll work on that. I appreciate it, and then goes back to doing what she's always done. So this is a key part of feedback, is using the feedback. And I know that it's sometimes difficult, especially if we don't like the feedback or we don't agree with the feedback, to show people that we're actually using it, changing as a result of that feedback. So we have to be careful not to ignore it, not to just pay it lip service, if you will, like in their face say, yes, thank you, I appreciate it, but then really not do anything different as a result. So she gets no credit for being a good listener, even though she probably actually was in reality a pretty good listener. So what we had to do, of course, is help her out, help her see that she needs to acknowledge what she's hearing and show that she's changing. It's also easy, I think, to deflect feedback to a personal trait that we feel we can't change. So let's talk about a client of ours that had a very strong personality, let's say, and had a tendency to be highly direct and would just say what was on his mind without really thinking about it. In fact, he would tell people, look, I'm just super direct, so, I call it like I see it. And if that upsets you or offends you, that's really on you because this is me, this is who I am. And so I think it's easy sometimes to get feedback and then assume, well, I can't change that. I'm highly direct. And research on communication styles suggests that that actually is true. If you are direct in your nature, probably not going to change that over time. But if we had a little more EQ in this individual, they would better recognize that their tendency is to want to say what's on their mind very bluntly, but they would read the room. They would read the person they're communicating with and decide, is this someone like me who's also very direct, or is this somebody who maybe needs messages a little softer? And then respond appropriately. So there may be some people that are also direct that this person can say, look, can I just be really frank with you? Can I just tell you what I'm thinking? And they may have a very open conversation that's very direct, and it's fine. But adapting to that other person who maybe isn't going to be as comfortable taking it so directly and understanding that the burden is on us to adapt to them instead of asking everybody to adapt to us. So even though you might get feedback about something that you feel you really can't change, can you make some temporary adjustments to a trait instead of just sort of writing off the feedback as, well, I can't do anything about it, so what am I going to do? It comes across as ego, right? Ego gets in the way of acceptance of feedback that we don't like or don't agree with. So in the end, why do we care? Why do we care what other people think? I've thought that too. Why do I care what this person thinks? But, right, this world is about alliances. And in the workplace, a lot of our opportunities are determined by how our peers see us and how our employees see us. So if you're somebody who's looking to maybe get promoted, this might be an area to really think about is what is my perception out there? What do people think of me? If this is something you're trying to use to build a relationship, like nobody wants to be in a marriage where the one person is never changing and asking the other person to do all the changing or isn't really open to any feedback. We have to be open to these things and be willing to, I guess, be humble enough to hear them and make change as a result. So one tool that we use to help people raise self-awareness and get feedback is called a 360 assessment. It's also called a multi-rater. So this is a tool that you can go online, answer a bunch of questions for yourself, but then we share those scores, or we give that report to other people that work around you, thus the 360. So a leader might take it, your peers might take it, your direct reports might take it, or your colleagues if you don't have direct reports. And this is a way to get a real clear measure of how you rate yourself compared to how everyone else rates you, and see how aligned those scores are. How high is your self-awareness around that? That's one good way to get feedback, and sort of an anonymous way, because people can be pretty honest. They're not individually identified traditionally. And then I know, when I wrote the book, we were all working in the office for the most part. Lots has changed in that area. So now with virtual work, I think it's even harder sometimes to get the feedback because you don't have that interpersonal time to just chit-chat. You don't have casual opportunities to give feedback. It's a lot more formal and structured. And if we talk about fear, it's a lot easier for me to hide behind my webcam at home, behind my computer, and not give you the feedback that you really need to hear, or write it off because I only see you a little bit in a week. I'm not with you every day like I used to be. So we need to be a little bit more overt in giving feedback to others. There's an element of emotional intelligence called emotional expression, and that's being able to share your thoughts and feelings with others. Are you comfortable doing that? We've seen a decline in emotional expression, especially since the work from home movement started, and we can't help but think that a lot of it is just, it's easier to say nothing or go along to get along than it is to bring up feedback. So one thing you could do if you're virtual or part-time virtual is be sure and leave your camera on. This is a way that people can get nonverbal feedback from you, so they can read your facial expressions. They can see how you're responding to something that they're saying. It's a great way to role model it if you're in a leadership role. If your camera isn't on, it's going to be hard to get the team's cameras on. But with everybody able to see each other, that helps because so much of feedback is nonverbal. It might also be helpful to have somebody coach you in a way. Ask somebody in advance. We actually have one client that just did this. We were so impressed because they had a big presentation they had to give, a team presentation that was virtual. So it was a group of 4 all calling in from different places, and they asked us to give them feedback on that presentation. So they recorded themselves, and then we did some practice runs in person where we got a chance to give them feedback. How well are they looking into the cameras? How well are they introducing each other and working together as a team? Where are the verbal fillers that they're coming? When are they rambling? So it was a more formal way to get feedback, but super helpful for a virtual team that had to present a pretty big presentation to some stakeholders. So you might ask for feedback. You might set somebody up. And I think it's great when you can say in advance, hey, I want feedback on how often I interrupt. I'm really working on trying to stay focused and not interrupt people. So in this next meeting, can you just watch and see how often I tend to jump on people or finish someone else's sentence? And that gives that person a great tool to know what to look for you. And then afterward, have the conversation around, here's what happened and here's when you did it. And then your awareness is so much higher afterward. So that's another way to get feedback in a virtual environment that we have found is super helpful. So this is a big topic. We'll probably be talking about this throughout the entire podcast series on getting feedback, but essentially in a nutshell, one way you can improve or prevent ignoring feedback or not getting feedback is to ask for it overtly and then accept it by showing change. Second, you could also make self-reflection a habit. So at the end of the day, think about, when did I do well today? When did I interact at my best? When did I interact at my worst? And what was going on there? So those moments to self-reflect are really important. I think we have very busy schedules. We do a lot of back-to-back meetings. Sometimes something that happened in a meeting in the morning has now rolled all day with us. And so by the last meeting of the day, you're still carrying around the mood from before lunch. So being able to kind of take those breaks throughout the day and kind of self-reflect, understand where I'm at, what do I need to do to sort of clear the slate so I can walk into the next meeting fresh. And then assessments are another great tool to use to increase self-awareness. So personality assessments, there's a lot of free ones out there online, very worth taking. Communication style assessments, super helpful. Emotional intelligence assessments. All of these are ways to help get feedback and improve that self-awareness so that you are much more better aligned to how you see yourself and how everyone else sees you. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.